Hello everyone, and welcome back to another True Crime Mysteries video. Thank you all for being here. Today we're discussing 4 more recently solved cold cases. Let's get into it. Number 4. Shelley Ann Werner. It was on June 16, 1980 in Mishawaka, Indiana, when 15-year-old Shelley Ann Werner was abducted in a grocery store parking lot. A witness stated that around 2 p.m. they saw Shelley unload her groceries into her orange Volkswagen Beetle when a young blonde male ran over. They then went on to say that they saw Shelley look surprised, but scooted over to the passenger seat, and the male got into the driver's seat and drove the vehicle out of the parking lot. Her car was found hours later at a park-in shop in Osceola, Indiana. The car showed no sign of a struggle, and there was no sign of Shelley. Shelley was missing for 10 days before 2 girls discovered her body in a ravine near an abandoned railroad track. When Shelley had been found, her partially clad body had already badly decomposed, leading law enforcement to believe she'd been murdered shortly after her abduction. An autopsy concluded that she'd been beaten and had died of a gunshot wound to the temple. The medical examiner wasn't able to determine if she'd been sexually assaulted, and no DNA was preserved from the body. No one knew of anyone who would have wanted to hurt Shelley. She was a normal junior in high school. Her mom taught elementary kids, and the murder had seemed completely random. One thing that had always gnawed at detectives: the witness that described Shelley as looking surprised when the man who drove her off got into her vehicle, but she hadn't called out or tried to run away, leading detectives always to believe that she knew her killer or killers. A sketch of the suspect was generated and posted around town, but no one came forward recognizing him. Detectives interviewed over 150 people, but still nothing turned up that could propel the case forward. For 4 decades, the case sat cold. However, in 2022, the Mishawaka Police Department established its first unit devoted to solving cold cases. Shelley's case was reopened, and police began to re-interview people who were still alive from the initial investigation. In doing that, they came into contact with a woman who brought previously unknown information to light. Detectives have stated that she gave them 3 names, 3 men that she had direct knowledge had taken part in murdering Shelley Ann Werner. The detectives learned that she only came forward after all the men involved had passed. She'd been severely abused by one of the men and had been threatened. Her family was also threatened if she ever came forward. Detectives went on to investigate the 3 men and concluded after multiple witnesses revealed they had a history of violence and the first witness testimony was likely accurate, and have concluded that these men were directly responsible for Shelley's murder. They went on to say that Shelley didn't directly know these men. They were older than she was, but had knowledge of their family members. They're not revealing the motivation for the murder, nor the identities of the men involved at this time. The men died in 2001, 2010, and 2018. Number 3. Candy Rogers. It would become Spokane, Washington's oldest cold case: the brutal murder of 9-year-old Candy Rogers, who was abducted while going door to door selling Campfire Girl mints. Candy Rogers disappeared on March 6, 1959. The 4th grader who attended Holmes Elementary School was described as small for her age, but had a determined mindset. She had recently joined the Campfire Girls, a youth organization focused on outdoor activities. She was a bluebird and was working towards ranking up in the organization. So that afternoon she came home, played with her dog, ate an oatmeal cookie, and set out carrying a bag of boxed mints to go door to door to sell them in the neighborhood. She was only meant to be out for an hour or so. She was to be home for supper, but never ran back through the door. When it was dark, her grandparents and mother started to look for her. As they searched and saw no sign, the police were called, who joined in the search along with neighbors. At 9 p.m., someone found several boxes of mints strewn along the road. The Campfire mints were believed to have been the same ones Candy had been selling, and Candy had been kidnapped. For days, the search continued, with Marines, the Air Force, the military, and residents searching on foot and by horseback. An exhaustive search was undertaken by over 1,200 people and ultimately ended 16 days later when her body was discovered in a wooded area covered in tree branches and pine needles 7 miles from her home. An autopsy was done which showed Candy had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled with an item of her clothing. It had been a horrific attack that shocked the community. Hundreds of tips began to flood in and hundreds of people were interviewed, but nothing closed the case. Spokane Police Department honed in on a suspect, a killer who lived nearby, Hugh B. Morse. He was already serving a life sentence for murder, but denied killing Candy Rogers. He had been the strongest suspect, however decades later he would be eliminated with DNA evidence. As the years passed, the case would be passed down from detective to detective, ultimately becoming the oldest cold case in the Spokane Police Department. In 2021, evidence in the case was re-examined for DNA evidence and forensic genealogy. Samples were recovered, and eventually they found a family tree with 3 brothers that closely matched the unknown suspect. Law enforcement reached out to some of the living relatives, which ultimately led them to the daughter of one of the brothers. DNA from her was a paternal match, but to be certain her father was the correct person, they opted to exhume the grave of her father, John Ray Hoff. The DNA was an exact match. Hoff was 20 at the time of the murder and lived a mile from Candy in 1959. There had been a small connection between the two. Hoff's younger stepsister was a little older than Candy and had also been in the Campfire Girls Club that Candy had been in. Hoff had been in the military, serving in Korea, but was dishonorably discharged when he was arrested and convicted for the assault with intent to rob in 1961. In that case, he had abducted, strangled, and assaulted a woman, but she had survived the attack. He only served 6 months in prison for that conviction. After his prison release, he worked odd jobs, he got married and had children. When his oldest daughter turned 9, the same age Candy was when she'd been murdered, he committed suicide. At the time of his death, his family believed he had depression or PTSD from his time in the military, but he may have killed himself for a more sinister reason, relieving the world of a serial predator. His daughter, now in her 60s, has fully cooperated with law enforcement to help close Candy's murder investigation. She apologized on behalf of her family in a statement to the media.
Very, very sorry for what my dad did, that he took her life horribly, and that he took her mom's life, really, took her dad's life. He took more lives than one.
Candy's surviving relative, a cousin, thanked Spokane PD for continuing to work on a cold case she never thought she would live to see closed, even after 6 decades. Number 2. Christy Mirack. It was only a few days before Christmas on December 21, 1992, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, when 25-year-old Christy Mirack was late for work. Christy was a 6th grade teacher and was never known to show up past her students, especially without calling someone first. She was known to show up at 8 a.m. every day. She was known to be extremely punctual and stuck to a daily routine. It was one of the final days before Christmas break. She had told her coworkers that she had a special day planned for the students, which was all the more concerning that she wasn't there. Running late was one thing, but missing the first bell was very unlikely for Christy. The teachers at Rowerstown Elementary were all close. Her friend and principal, Harry Goodman, decided that it would be best if he went over and checked on Christy at her home since the other teachers had students to watch over. He made the short drive over and immediately knew something was amiss. Her car was still parked out front, and then he saw that the front door to Christy's townhome was left open. As he got closer, he could see into the entryway of the home and saw Christmas presents carefully wrapped were strewn about, and as he drew nearer, he saw Christy's body lifeless between the entryway and the living room. He ran over to a neighbor's home to call 911. When first responders arrived, Christy was cold to the touch, and she was declared deceased at the scene. An autopsy later revealed that her cause of death was strangulation. She had extensive defensive injuries, including a broken jaw, bruises all over her, and a tooth that had been knocked out. She had bruises on her neck, showing that someone had tried to strangle her manually, but also used a sweater as a ligature. Christy was also sexually assaulted. At the crime scene, officers found scuff marks just outside Christy's front door, pinpointing to a likely point of access for the attacker. It appeared that Christy had just been walking out the door when her attacker forced their way into her home. She was still wearing her gloves. Her purse was found nearby, and a bag filled with Christmas presents meant for each of her students were all found close to her body. Neighbors reported hearing a scream at around 7:15 a.m., but it was only a short shriek. Afterwards, it was silent, so they didn't call law enforcement. Christy's roommate had left at 7 a.m., so they believed it was a targeted attack, with someone surveilling Christy's home and learning her schedule. They also reported seeing a man running in the direction of Christy's townhome. He had come out of a white car parked nearby. They described the man as Caucasian, athletic build, in his 20s, with sandy blonde or light brown hair, cut short. Christy was known to be a stickler for home security. She was always known to keep her home and car locked at all times. It was something she and her roommate had different opinions on. Her roommate wasn't certain she locked the door when she left for work that morning. Law enforcement interviewed Christy's friends and family. Christy and a group of her friends had gone to a club that weekend. Law enforcement had found a ticket stub in her wallet for the club. None of her friends knew of anyone who may have wanted to harm Christy, but revealed she had recently broken up with a boyfriend who they only knew as Dagger. Dagger was located, and he had a strong alibi. He had been in another state with his wife. Christy hadn't known he was married and had recently ended the relationship when she realized he wasn't going to propose. His DNA was also collected, which didn't match the sample from the killer. Harry Goodman was also investigated, as detectives found it suspicious that he'd been the one to go over to her home that morning, finding his interest in the young teacher concerning. But he was also eliminated both by alibi and DNA. Investigators even looked into the possibility it had been a hired hit. However, that trail ended nowhere. The more likely scenario was of a spurned suitor or stalker, though no one knew of anyone who that could be, nor had Christy made any mention of being harassed. The vehicle seen the morning of the murder was described as a white or light gray 1987 to 1991 Dodge Daytona hatchback. They said that the car had started appearing up to 2 weeks before the murder and hadn't been seen since. The car hadn't been well kept. It was noted as dirty, faded, and dull. A police sketch was done of the man seen that morning and distributed, but no one was identified as a match. Despite an exhaustive investigation, eventually the leads ran dry and the case went cold. In 2016, the case was reopened, and the DNA from the crime scene was resubmitted for further genetic analysis. Parabon Nanolabs created this composite image of what the murderer might have looked like based on his DNA. It was also at this point that the suspect was identified as having a mix of Latin and European descent, which might have differed from the original sketch of the suspect. The DNA was uploaded to state and national databases, but neither came up with any leads. In 2019, the case was again re-examined, and this time, Parabon was asked to run genetic genealogy analysis on the DNA. And there they found genetic relatives of the suspect, allowing them to begin to piece together a family tree, making it very likely a suspect could be identified. Raymond Charles Howe was the most likely suspect. He was working as a wedding DJ in Lancaster, Pennsylvania at the time of the murder. He was 23 years old and had worked at several nightclubs in 1992 as a DJ. He had even worked at the club that Christy had gone to the Saturday before her murder. Christy's home had been between his home and place of work, giving him further opportunity to stalk Christy. She may have rejected him at some point, and he could have either followed her home or saw her outside while he was heading home. Police surveilled the now 50-year-old DJ and saw him throw away a water bottle and chewing gum. Both items were retrieved by detectives and tested for DNA, and it was a match. After 3 decades, Christy Mirack's killer had been identified. Howe was arrested and charged with criminal homicide, 3 charges of sexual assault, and 2 counts of involuntary deviant assault. There was no trial for Howe, as he pleaded guilty to the charges, and he was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility for parole, plus an additional 120 years. However, this case has recently been in the news because Howe's legal team has made several appeals. Howe is now alleging that he was coerced into confessing and he has withdrawn his guilty plea. He went on to say that he and Christy had a consensual encounter the morning of her murder, but he had left her alive and well, and is alleging that someone else killed her that morning. He wanted several items in the home retested to prove another suspect was in the home. His legal team stated that he should have a trial, allowing his legal team the opportunity to retest the DNA evidence. In November 2022, the appeal was denied. The judge who presided over the decision said that adequate DNA technology and preservation practices were available in 1992 and therefore it is unlikely to yield different results. In her judgment, she made the statement, quote, "Obviously, we think this is the correct legal decision and hope it provides some measure of relief for the family, but this is likely just the beginning of what can be a lengthy appellate process." Howe's next appeal attempt will need to be filed with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Christy Mirack's mother passed before ever seeing justice for her daughter's murder, but it had been her dying wish for there to be justice. Christy's brother thanked the media for keeping the case alive and Lancaster Police Department for continuing to seek justice. Number 1. Michael Sewell. It was on December 18, 1971, when the news of a fire devastated the Sewell family. 16-year-old Michael Sewell had been camping with 2 friends, Stanley Robinson and Jerry Autry. The 3 had been in a cabin in Brownstown, Indiana. The cabin had been remote, so by the time help arrived, the cabin had mostly burned completely away. 2 class rings were found at the scene, which were used to determine the identity of 2 sets of badly charred remains, Stanley and Jerry. However, Michael was missing. The crime scene yielded little evidence. The surrounding area, including the waters, were all searched in case Michael had managed to escape the blaze. Without Michael's body, there was also suspicion as to why his friends were dead, but he wasn't there. Local gossip that Michael had murdered his friends had gotten so bad that his family had to move from the area. For 5 decades, it remained a mystery. Michael was never seen or heard from again. As time went on, those who remembered Michael began to believe that they would never have answers as to what had happened to him. In 2022, the case was reopened, and the caskets of Stanley and Jerry were exhumed with the permission of their families to do further modern analysis of the remains. When examined, it was determined that a 3rd set of remains were there. Further DNA testing was done, which determined Michael Sewell's remains had been in the cabin all along, misplaced with his friends' caskets for over 50 years. The closure of the case was bittersweet for the Sewell family, though according to the family, it has provided closure.
We didn't get to have a service for him. We put a memorial plaque down for him, but there's nothing in it. The only thing my mom could do, she got a picture of him and lit candles. That's all we got for him. And then we just had to learn to live with it.
Well, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. As always, if you want to support the channel, the easiest way is to hit the like button. You can also subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. Other ways to support the channel by joining my Patreon or channel membership. I also have merch, and you'll find all the links in the description box, plus a few extras. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter for more. Plus, newly, we have Twitch. But with that being said, thank you so much for being here and supporting what I do. It's very appreciated. That's it from me. I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.